I'm glad you're here beyond 60 stories, where every life has a story to tell. I am 83 years old, and there is one question I avoided for most of my life. Not because it was difficult to understand, but because answering it honestly would have required me to live differently. The answer did not come quickly. It took a lifetime. The question was not about success, money, or achievement. It was simpler and far more unsettling than that. It was this: am I living in a way that allows love to be present now, or am I always postponing it for later? For many years, I believed life would eventually slow down, that once responsibilities were handled and goals were reached, there would be time left for closeness, presence, and meaning. I thought love could wait patiently on the sidelines while I attended to what seemed urgent. In today's video, we're revealing how this single question changed, how I see everything, and why most people never truly ask it until time forces their hand. This is not advice, and it is not a lesson. It is simply one person's reflection, shared from the far side of many decades. Before we begin, tap the like button and subscribe to Beyond 60 Stories. This channel exists for those moments when reflection feels more valuable than instruction. Let me tell you how this question first began to surface, long before I was ready to hear its answer. Hash 1, the question I didn't know I was avoiding. For most of my adult life, I believed I was doing what life required of me. I worked hard, planned carefully, and tried to be responsible. From the outside, everything appeared reasonable and well-structured. Inside, I rarely paused long enough to ask myself why I was moving so quickly from one obligation to the next dot. The question did not arrive as a single moment of clarity. It lingered quietly beneath daily routine. It appeared as a faint sense of distance during conversations, as a subtle impatience when time felt wasted on things that did not advance anything measurable. I did not recognize it as a question then. I experienced it only as restlessness. Looking back, I see that the question was always present. It was asking whether my life was organized around connection or control, around presence or preparation. But I had learned, like many people of my generation, that asking such questions too early was indulgent. Meaning was something you earned later, after proving your usefulness. Love, I believed, was dependable enough to wait. Relationships would remain stable. Time would remain generous. The future would provide opportunities to make things right, to be more attentive, to be fully there. I mistook stability for permanence and routine for safety. The years passed quietly this way, not dramatically, not unhappily, but without deep examination, and that is perhaps the most dangerous way to move through life. When nothing feels urgent enough to question, the essential often goes untouched. The question I avoided was not dramatic or philosophical on the surface. It was deeply practical. It asked whether my days reflected what I claimed mattered most, whether love was central or merely assumed, whether presence was chosen or postponed. I did not ask it because I feared the answer would require sacrifice, and I was right. Honest answers always do. What finally forced this question into the open was not wisdom or reflection, but interruption. And once it was asked clearly, there was no returning to the life I had been living before. Hash 2, love cannot be lived on credit. There is a belief many people carry without realizing it, a belief so quietly accepted that it is rarely questioned, even by those who consider themselves thoughtful and emotionally aware. It is the belief that love can be postponed without consequence, that presence can be delayed, attention rescheduled, connection deferred, until life becomes calmer, simpler, or more manageable. This belief feels responsible, even mature, because it aligns with how we are taught to organize our lives around work, obligation, and long-term planning. But love does not function like a long-term investment. It cannot be stored, accumulated, or accessed later with interest. Love exists only in the moments we choose to be available to it, moments that often appear ordinary and unremarkable while they are happening. When these moments are repeatedly delayed, love does not remain unchanged. It does not pause patiently in the background. It reshapes itself, thins out, or quietly withdraws, not as punishment, but as a natural response to absence. Many people mistake intention for participation. They intend to be more attentive when things slow down, to listen more deeply when responsibilities ease, to reconnect once they have more energy to give. These intentions are sincere, and sincerity often disguises the cost of delay. Over time, intentions that are never embodied become promises made to a future version of oneself that may never arrive. What makes this particularly difficult to see is that postponement rarely feels like neglect. It feels like preparation. It feels like sacrifice for a greater good. But love does not recognize future plans as proof of care. It responds only to presence. When presence is repeatedly postponed, the emotional bond does not simply wait. It adapts to the reality it is given. This is how distance often forms without conflict, not through betrayal or cruelty, but through absence that feels justified. Conversations become shorter. Curiosity fades. Familiarity replaces intimacy. And because nothing dramatic has happened, the change is easy to overlook. People tell themselves that this is simply how life works, that closeness ebbs and flows, that things will return when there is more time. But time does not return. It only moves forward. And love, when consistently lived on credit, begins to lose its immediacy. It becomes something remembered or anticipated rather than something experienced. If this reflection feels familiar, you are not alone. Many intelligent, caring people live this way, believing they are being sensible while gradually trading presence for productivity. If you feel comfortable, share in the comments a moment when you realized love had been waiting longer than you expected. Your reflection may help someone else notice the pattern before it becomes permanent. 3. When time stops feeling endless. There is a subtle shift that happens when time no longer feels theoretical. It does not arrive with drama or panic, but with a quiet change in perception. Days begin to feel distinct rather than interchangeable. Choices carry weight, not because they are frightening, but because they are finite. Time, once assumed to be generous, becomes visible. And when time becomes visible, life becomes honest. For much of life, time feels like a background condition, something that supports plans rather than questions them. We schedule years ahead with confidence, believing that what matters can always be addressed later. But at a certain point, later stops feeling abstract. It feels closer, more defined, not as an ending, but as a boundary, and boundaries have a way of clarifying priorities without argument. When time became visible to me, I noticed how often I had lived as though meaning would arrive all at once, fully formed, after certain conditions were met, after the work slowed down, after stability was secured, after uncertainty was resolved. But meaning does not arrive as a reward for patience. It emerges gradually, through repeated acts of attention, through choosing presence over efficiency, listening over planning, and connection over control. This awareness changed how I understood love. Love stopped feeling like something I needed to protect for the future, and began to feel like something I needed to inhabit now. Not perfectly, not intensely, but honestly, I began to see that love does not grow through constant effort, but through consistency of presence. Through showing up in small, unremarkable moments that rarely feel important while they are happening, but become essential when remembered. Time also changed how regret felt. Regret did not disappear, but it softened. It stopped accusing and began instructing. It no longer asked why things were missed, but what could still be chosen differently. This shift mattered. Regret that only looks backward hardens the heart. Regret that informs the present becomes a guide rather than a burden. As time became more visible, urgency did not increase. Clarity did. I stopped feeling the need to fill every day with activity, explanation, or justification. I became more selective, not out of fear, but out of respect for what remained. When time is no longer assumed to be endless, distraction loses its appeal. What remains is a quieter attention to what actually nourishes rather than merely occupies. Love, in this context, became simpler, less dramatic, less performative. It was no longer measured by intensity or sacrifice, but by ease of presence. I noticed that love feels calm when it is real, and restless when it is compensating for absence. This understanding did not make love smaller. It made it sustainable. There is a particular freedom that comes when you stop believing you must become someone else before you are allowed to live meaningfully. When time becomes visible, you stop rehearsing life and begin participating in it. You realize that waiting for ideal conditions is simply another way of avoiding the present. 4. The question that changed how I see everything. The question that changed everything was not dramatic, philosophical, or difficult to phrase. It did not demand intelligence or bravery to ask. What it demanded was honesty, the kind that cannot be negotiated or postponed. The question was simply whether the way life was arranged actually allowed love to be present, or whether love was always being fitted into the remaining space after everything else had been decided. Many people believe love is something that will naturally expand once life becomes calmer, once obligations ease, once the pressure lifts. But life rarely reorganizes itself to make room for what matters most. Without conscious attention, love is forced to adapt to whatever structure already exists. And when love is repeatedly asked to squeeze itself into the margins, it begins to feel conditional, fragile, or exhausting. This is where many misunderstand love's nature. Love does not ask to be broadcast through words or promises. It asks to be reflected in the shape of daily life, in how time is protected, in how attention is offered, in how presence is chosen, even when it feels inefficient. When life is arranged entirely around productivity, performance, or future security, love becomes something that must compete rather than belong. The most revealing part of this question is that it does not judge past choices. It does not accuse or shame, it simply observes. It asks whether the current structure of life makes space for closeness without negotiation, or whether closeness must always wait for permission. This observation alone can be unsettling, because it exposes how often love has been treated as flexible, while everything else has been treated as fixed. When people finally sit with this question, many discover that the issue was never a lack of love, but a lack of room. Love was present, but crowded out by schedules, expectations, and habits that were never revisited. And because these habits felt normal and responsible, they went unexamined for years. At 83, I no longer believe that life reveals its meaning in clear milestones or decisive moments. Meaning is not something we arrive at once. Everything is in place. It is something we recognize only when we stop postponing it. The question that changed how I see everything did not demand urgency or dramatic action. It demanded honesty, and honesty has a way of quietly rearranging a life. The answer, when it finally became clear, was not complicated. Love was never meant to be something fitted in later, something postponed until conditions were perfect, or something lived only after responsibility was fulfilled. Love was meant to be present while life was still unfinished, imperfect, and uncertain. When I stopped living on credit with time, life did not suddenly become easier, but it became more real. I learned that time does not need to be managed as much as it needs to be respected. And respect for time shows itself in how we choose to be present, how we listen, how we protect what quietly matters instead of what loudly demands attention. Love, lived this way, does not feel dramatic or consuming. It feels steady, grounding, and deeply human. If this reflection stayed with you, consider liking the video and subscribing to Beyond 60 Stories. And I would truly like to hear from you in the comments below. What question would you want this channel to explore next? Or what reflection from your own life feels ready to be spoken now? Thank you for being here and for bringing your own years of experience, attention, and wisdom into this shared moment.